Hi guys, so the other night I watched this as part of my ongoing Resident Evil review series. Actually, I got about 5 minutes through this before I got frustrated with how grainy and old this DVD version looks now. So I went on Prime to see if they had a more upscaled version, and to my delight they did. The deserts in this film look a lot better in 4K. So this was the third film in the franchise. It was directed by a guy called Russell Mulcahy. You might remember him from such classics as Highlander 2 and that heist film from the 90s that everybody loved, The Real McCoy, starring Kim Basinger. Actually, to be honest, full disclosure, Russell Mulcahy also did the first Highlander film, which is actually pretty good, but on the whole, you look at his CV, you wouldn't really say that he's an A-list director, and this is not an A-grade film. It does feel like a bit of a downgrade from the first two, and part of the reason for that is just how weird the story progression is between 2 and 3. Remember that seamless transition between the first Resi film and Resident Evil Apocalypse? Well, between 2 and 3, the story has jumped on either 5 years or 8 years. The film can't make its mind up. Alice is driving around on a motorcycle at the start of this. Now, it's explained later that the reason she's doing this is because she doesn't want to have her friends near her in case Umbrella catch up to her. She doesn't want her friends to get into trouble. But we don't find this out for about 40 minutes. So in the beginning of the movie, it's a little bit jarring. There's no Jill Valentine in this movie at all. It's not even explained what happened to her after the second film. Now, I did do a little bit of research as to why Sienna Gilroy didn't come back for this. When I say research, I mean I literally just looked at my phone. I didn't go down the library and start looking at old scrolls and things like that. So apparently she was asked to come back for the third film, but she turned it down in favour of being in Eragon the movie. Now, I've read the Eragon novel. It's not very good. I can't imagine the film is much better, so I'm very surprised that Sienna would choose that over Resi, but there you go. So director Russell Mulcahy had a bit of a hole to fill in the script. Now, his first idea was to cross over his Highlander films with Resident Evil and bring in Sean Connery as Ramirez as a kind of mentor for Alex, help her hone her new skills. Actually, I'm just joking, he didn't think about doing that. What he actually did was bring in Claire Redfield, another beloved Resident Evil character from the video games. In fact, probably Claire Redfield has been in more Resi stuff over the years than Jill Valentine. I certainly don't have a preference when it comes to Claire or Jill. Claire, at the start of this film, is driving some kind of convoy through Utah, and that's another weird thing about this film. At the end of the second film, the virus had been contained, but when we get to the third film, the virus has clearly been unleashed and destroyed the entire world and turned everywhere into one big kind of wasteland, like in Mad Max 3. It's like we've skipped an entire movie between 2 and 3. And the titles aren't quite right either. I would have called this film Resident Evil Apocalypse because an apocalypse has clearly happened. Everywhere, I mean, people aren't extinct yet. The second film I would have called maybe Resident Evil Containment because they were trying to contain the virus, or just Resident Evil Nemesis, but hey-ho. If you'd have told me before this film came out that Ali Larter was going to be playing Claire, I would have feared the worst because she was very bland in some of those early Final Destination films, but she's much better in this. I think probably she'd gained a lot more confidence in her career by the time she came to Resident Evil Extinction. She plays the action girl very well. On the downside, they don't do anything with her character, really. We don't find out anything about how she came to be the leader of this convoy. There's no character arc there. We don't find out anything more about Alice in this one either, but then again, we didn't find out anything more about her in the second one, so that's nothing new. LJ, possibly my favourite character from the second film, they've turned him into a coward for this one. He gets bitten very early on, and then he doesn't tell anybody, so for the rest of the film, he's putting the rest of the group's lives in danger, and ultimately, he does cost Oliveira his life, which leaves a sour taste in the mouth because he's probably the best character in this, even if he wasn't necessarily in the second one. At least Oliveira gets a good death when he drives the truck, flips it over, and blows a load of zombies up. The newer characters in this, apart from Claire, make hardly any impact. I mean, they are so thinly drawn. Most of them only get a couple of lines here and there. There's one guy in a cowboy hat who's okay, I suppose. A couple of them are English, which is quite bizarre. I mean, why were they in America at the time this outbreak happened, in this neck of the woods? Were they just backpacking across the Valley of Death, and then Claire's convoy happened to go past? There are a lot of English actors in this film. It's very strange. Even on the villain side, Dr. Isaac is a better villain than Major Kane from the previous film. That's where Extinction does score some points over Apocalypse. There's also this good subordinate that he's got called Slater. And at least Dr. Isaacs has a purpose here. You know, he's been tasked by Umbrella to find a cure to the virus. This is a worthwhile pursuit. It's just that Isaacs goes about it in a very evil way, killing scientists on a whim. But because he has a worthwhile goal, I actually enjoyed watching the scenes in the villain's lair more than I enjoyed watching the good guys. I mean, the good guys in this have no purpose. There's no stakes to their situation. In the first film, everybody had to get out of this underground lab, otherwise they would be trapped in there forever. Big stakes. Second film, they had to get out of the city, or kaboom, they would blow up. In this film, Claire's convoy is just kind of casually ambling across the desert with no purpose. Occasionally they'll find a motel and raid it for supplies, and that's about it. And then halfway through, they decide that they might like to go up to Alaska and be safe there. It's not particularly exciting, to say the least. Some of the action scenes are problematic. There's an early scene where Alice is fighting these marauders and she battles these zombie dogs. She's tying them up with cables and stuff, but the cuts happen so quickly you can't tell what the hell's going on. It's only at the end of all this that we get to see the final result of her handiwork, but it's just too confusing the way that it's been filmed. Later on, the characters announce that they're going to Vegas for supplies, and the first time I watched this I thought, oh great, this is probably going to be the big part of the movie, the part where all the money's gone. But then they arrive in Vegas, it's mostly being swallowed by sand. I mean, if you compare this depiction of Vegas in a post-apocalyptic world to the one that we get in Army of the Dead, it's no comparison. There are still some really tall buildings, but they don't make any use of them. You know, all the action just happens on the ground. And then there's this container full of super zombies that opens up and they all spill out. But there seems to be more zombies on the outside than can possibly fit into that container. I mean, it's as if more zombies were spawning inside the container during the battle which follows, and you can't keep up with the geography of who's fighting who and how many zombies are left. It's like they just filmed a load of action bits in close quarters and then just strung them all together. It doesn't fit very well. There's this one bit where the guy in the cowboy hat is up on this Eiffel Tower replica and some zombies get behind him high up on this tower. And I think to myself, there's no way that he would have allowed that to happen. It's a really poor death. There is a good action segment where these ravens who are zombified all fly in and kill about 3 or 4 of the good guys in one fell swoop, no pun intended. That bit was pretty good, and Alice turns up at the last minute and uses her special powers to change the direction of all these flames. And the final battle between Alice and the mutated version of Dr. Isaacs, that was pretty decent as well, although I personally wouldn't have brought back the lasers from the first film. I thought that was a bit lazy, but this is the first time in the film series, I think, where one of the human villains turns into a creature because they've started swallowing their own concoctions. That happens a lot in the video games. We do get this really bad version of Wesker during this. Halfway through he pops up to talk to Isaacs, and then at the end he's there again when Alice is telling him that she's going to come for him. He's played here by quite a famous actor, I think, or at least he would go on to be very famous. I forget his name, but he went on to be the lead in a show called Terra Nova and also a show called Vegas. He's very well known now, very recognizable, but I think when Resident Evil Extinction came out, he wasn't as well known, hence why he took this fairly small role, but it's not a very good version of Wesker. I mean, if you rewatch Extinction, having watched Resident Evil Afterlife and the great version of Wesker we get in that film, played by Sean Roberts, it doesn't compare. the Wesker in this version feels like somebody cosplaying really badly. It's not great. So on the whole, Resident Evil Extinction is a fairly disappointing experience for me. I didn't actually realise until I came to this film with my reviewer's hat on just how weak it is compared to the others. I used to think that this was a kind of okay one, just maybe not quite as good as Apocalypse. Now I think that it's considerably below the first two films. It's all style and no substance. I mean, the desert looks great in 4K. Some of the long shots of the hundreds of zombies surrounding the villain's camp looks very impressive. The mutated form of Dr. Isaacs looks very good. The snippets of goodness throughout the film, but the characterization is really weak. It's not a very absorbing plot. And if this had been the final film in a trilogy, it would have been a very disappointing end. At least we can just look at this and say, well, this is just a stopgap on the journey of a six-film arc. But honestly, the only reason why I watch this now and will continue to watch it in the future is just to get that full experience of the six-film story. But those are my thoughts. Let's get to the bag of terror and find out what sort of score I'm going to give this. Two bloody axes out of 5, and I think that's fairly generous. This is a well-made film, but it's not a very well-written one. So I will be back soon with a review for Resident Evil Afterlife. Until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.